Welcome to another video in the TimCo Retail Manager course. This course focuses on real-world application development. Right now, we're working on building out our first section of work, which is the basic register. In this video, we're going to continue working on our login form. Now, if you're a Patreon supporter at the $5 per month level or higher, make sure you head over to the site to get the latest source code. Either way, make sure you're subscribed to this channel so you can follow along. Finally, as you think of suggestions, please leave them in the comments below. I want to hear your thoughts on this course. I've got a running list of suggestions for improvements, and they'll definitely make this application better. So let's get started. Now, the first thing, I usually forget to do this because it's just kind of habit when I'm working by myself not to do it, and that's kind of a bad habit. I'm going to go to Team Explorer and go to Sync and just hit Fetch. And make sure there's no remote changes on the server that I don't have. And there's not, because I'm working in a team environment of 1. Now, occasionally, there will be some in here because I changed something on the server on Azure DevOps itself, which created a commit. But I haven't done that, so let's go to Solution Explorer. And let's look at the desktop UI. We're going to look at the view and view model for the login view. Where we left off is we wired up this login button so that when they put the username and password in, hit login, it comes down here to this login method, which is asynchronous. And the reason it's asynchronous is because it's calling an API. We want to make those calls asynchronous, not synchronous. That way it doesn't lock our application up. And by default, API calls or web calls in general are asynchronous. So we're going to await that result, and based on that result, we're doing nothing right now. We're just saying, yeah, we got it. Now that returns a authenticated user model. So that's this right here, which is an access token and a username. So that's what it returns, and we're just capturing it. Now, if it fails, we just temporarily put a console write line in there, essentially just so we have something in there to show that we can put a breakpoint on it, essentially, and then read this exception. So that's really all there was to it. So we need to get rid of this and actually do something here. And then we're going to talk about what we're going to do for this returning result where it actually got the information. Now what? Okay, so let's start with the catch. What do you want to do when it fails? When the login name or password is incorrect, when the API couldn't be found, all these different type of things. What should we do? Well, I think the best thing, the simplest thing, that's one of the keys here, is you can go crazy with, being really in depth in your error messaging and how you display it to the user. But I think the basics here are right above username and the text box. I want to put a red text that just gives the error message, essentially. So let's do that. And how do we do that? Because that sounds great, but yeah, how do you do it? Well, what we're going to do is right now we are on row number 1, it looks like. So that's row 1. And login and form is in row 0. Well, we're actually going to add a new row. We're going to bump everything down. So let's start from the bottom up. Let's say this is row 4. Then this is row 3, and so is this. Whoops. That's 3, not 5. 3, there we go. And then we have, this is row 2 and row 2. So it looks mostly the same except for our login box, which got quite large. And that's because we're on row 4, which 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 is the one that is the auto height. Whoops. There we go. 4 is the auto height row. I'm sorry, the star height, which is, it automatically resizes to whatever's left. So let's copy one auto row and paste it down below. And now you have an extra row that's below the login that actually has the extra information or extra space. So now we have row number 1 is not currently being used. So we can add it. And this is the error message row. So let's put a text block. We're going to give it a name because we're actually going to modify it. So let's give it a name. Let's call it the, let's go simple and go error message. And we're going to say, for right now, let's give it a text. We're going to eliminate this in just a minute, but this is just for testing purposes. This is an error message, something like that. And then we need to give it a grid.row, is row 1, and grid.column is column 1. We want to column span the 2. Grid.column span 2 columns. And let's see how this looks. Like so. So that's what our message looks like. Let's put my cursor down here. There we go. Not great so far. I want to give it some more space. And let's start with the color. The color right now is black. Not a big fan of that. I want red. So let's give it some space first. Right now the margins, let's give it a margin below. So margin, let's give it 0, 0, 20, 0. Whoops. Wrong one. There we go. 20. Let's get 20 underneath. And we're going to give it a color of red. There we go. So now that looks a little more important. Now, if we make it larger, that message, let's just see what that looks like. So that makes it larger, but it's not great. It kind of expands out too far. And it makes, everything look a little ugly. So let's give it a max width. So right now we have, and let's cut this out for a minute. Here's a trick. So right now it tells me what my column widths are. Okay, so it says up here, it says 134 and it says 172. Add those together, I have 306. So that could be my max width, it's 306. Let's put it 300 instead. So max width is 300. So now, if I paste that back in, notice it doesn't actually go outside the box. It stays inside the box, but it doesn't wrap. So let's fix that. So let's go back up here to our error message. Let's come down to the next line. Let's say text wrapping equals wrap. And there we go. So now what it's doing is it's going to wrap down to the next line, until it fills up the space that it needs. This is the beauty of WPF is it will fill the space that it needs, and it will contract away when it doesn't need that space anymore. So this looks good right here. I think I like it. So what we're going to do is we're going to wipe out this text property because this was just for testing. The actual test, the actual value comes from the view model. But here's a problem. Because I set the margin to be the bottom to be 20, it's keeping that space even when nothing is there. So we really want to get rid of the margin so we don't have that available anymore. So that still isn't right. And the reason why is because this is still visible, and so it takes up one character height even though there's no characters in the text box. However, there's a visibility property. If we set that to collapse, notice how it collapses over here. We can't even see that space. Let's just put back in place the margin. So 0, 0, 0, and 20. And notice nothing changes over here. But if I take away my visibility collapsed, it brings back that whole box and the margin. So that's what we need to do. We need to apply a visibility to this box. How do we do that? Well, we're going to have to use some custom binding. So we're going to say visibility again equals binding on, we don't have a property yet, so let's just say we're going to name it is error visible. That's a Boolean variable. And we need a converter. This is going to kind of scroll a little bit. So I'm going to put this, I'm just going to scroll because I can't really help it. Converter equals another curly brace, static resource, Boolean to visibility converter, curly brace. Okay. Now it gives us an invalid markup, but don't worry. We'll take care of that. First, you make sure you have the right number of curly braces, and we do not. There we go. Now we have the correct number of curly braces because we have one here. So there's two here. Now remove one because we got the other side right there. And then we have the last one right here. Remove that one. You're good to go. So 2 opens, 2 closes. That's good. So what are we doing? Well, we're using a binding here that is inside Calibre and Micro. Actually, it's not Calibre and Micro. It's built into DPF. Sorry. So it's still yelling at us though and saying, I can't find the resource Boolean to visibility converter. So what do we do? Well, we need to actually put that resource in the system. Now it's actually, like I said, built in. So let's go to app.xaml. And here we have our resource dictionary, which we're merging in Bootstrapper. But below the merged in dictionary from Bootstrapper, we want to bring in our Boolean to visibility converter. That's what we're looking for. Now I've got to give it a key. The key is how we refer to it. Now, what I'm going to do is give the same key as the name itself. That just keeps it simple. And you're not wondering, where did that come from? How we do that? It's, it's a one-to-one relationship, which that's what I used over here when I said static resource from the resource dictionary. I want the Boolean to visibility converter. So what does this do? Well, it converts a Boolean, which returns true or false, to visibility, because visibility doesn't have true or false. It has visible, collapsed, and hidden. There's 3 different states, and none of them are true or false. So what it does is it says if it's true, then it's visible. If it's false, it's collapsed. We don't deal with hidden. Okay, so we're going to do collapsed or visible. And that's based upon the binding for is error visible. So let's add the is error visible and error message properties to our view model. So let's go to our view model. And we need a couple of properties here. So let's create our our property. So prop full. And we're going to say this is let's start with our Boolean. And we called it is error visible. So I'm going to call it underscore lowercase I is error visible. and then is error visible, just like I called it before. And there's our Boolean. Now we can change this set to have a notify of property change. So let's grab a copy of this. So notify of property change for is error visible. All right. And now we need one more, and this is for the error message. Let's copy that. And we'll do our prop full. This is a string. And this is underscore error message. Error message. And again, we're going to change this to have a notify of property change. And this is going to be for the error message. But we should also have one for is visible because the visibility will change as well. And actually, I'm going to make this a read-only property because there's no reason for us to have a backing field even for this, for is visible, because this is just a calculation. So let's do this. So instead of returning this, we're going to return, we can either do it inline or we can do it in a series of lines. So let's do a bool output equals false, and then say if error message dot length is greater than 0. If it's greater than 0, output equals true. And then we return output, which I have two return statements now. There we go. So that's our is error visible. It's just a get and it does a calculation. But we still trigger the notify of property change whenever the error message changes. So to see if this works, all we need to do is come down here where it has an exception and say error message equals ex.message. And that should be all we need to do. If we get an error, it's going to put it into the error message property, which is going to trigger the notify of property change. Let's see if it works. Now, remember running this is going to start two things. One is going to start our web server, and that's right there. And so it's loading up to make sure that the API gets started and we can use it from our WPF application. It'll also start our WPF application so that we can actually log in. But unfortunately, it hangs up right here. We go back to Visual Studio. We find out why. We're saying if error message.length is greater than 0, but it's null. So we need to fix that. The quickest fix is that right there. Put a question mark after error message. If it's null, it's not going to have a length of greater than 0. Therefore, it's going to skip this whole thing. Let's start again. Now it's running. And our WPF application is running. We're just waiting for, there we go, our API to start. Now let's type in test, and hit login, which that should not work because test is not a valid username and password. And we hit login and we get bad request and it's in red. Excellent. So now if I were to say I am timcorey.com and pwd12345 dot and hit login, that should log in. In fact, let's verify that it does by putting a breakpoint at the end of our try. So let's go back over here and hit login. And in fact, it does log in and the result says here's a token and here's the username. So it worked. Now the other, not a bug, but something I haven't handled yet is the fact that it still says bad request right here. Now this will go away because we're going to close the login form, but it's not good form to have the bad request stay there. So let's go ahead and take care of getting rid of that error message once we retry the login. All right, so let's stop this whole thing. So if we get an error message, we put it, or if we catch an exception, we put the error message into the display box. But if we don't get an error message, or when we're trying actually, so we first try something, we should say error message equals empty string. That way, we reset that box every single time. That clears out our error. Now, we also talked about last time the idea of making these boxes bigger because they're too small right now. And right now, again, that column width is 172. So let's change these boxes. Instead of a minimum width of 150, let's make them at least, let's go with 350 and see what that looks like. That seems more like what we've been seeing when I actually fill in my login and password. Now notice that, it's hard to see, but there you go. It actually resized both of these, not just one, even though the other one says minimum width of 150. That's because with the beauty of DPF, this column that they're in is auto resizing. It resizes to the largest element. And everything else will just fill the space unless you give it an actual width, which we're avoiding. We don't want to give it actual widths and heights. So this one's 350, therefore this one matches even though the minimum is 150. It's the minimum, it's not the maximum. So we can change it to match just so we have the two in sync. And now we're set. Now that username is right next to, and password, they're right next to the boxes. So if you notice, there's not a lot of space between these two things. So let's give it a little bit of margin. So let's go over here. It is the right margin. So it's actually this one right here. And let's just give it 5. And we'll do the same thing for the password box. So 5. And now if we look at this, we see there's a little more space between the username and the text box and the password and the text box as well. So it gives us a little more space here. Also notice that this is taking up space in development mode, even though it's not in production mode. And that might be bothersome because the form doesn't look like this normally. It only looks like this one is an error and there's actually text here. So how do we get design time support for no space here? Well, we can come up here to our binding. This is this visibility right here. Now this is very long already, but we can put after our converter, we can put comma and say fallback value equals collapsed. And what that'll do, notice it took it away, is it says if you can't find a value, like if that Boolean wasn't there, or that error message property wasn't there, then, I'm sorry, is visible, error visible property. So if that binding wasn't there, it's going to fall back to collapsed, which is fine because if it's not there, we've got a problem and we wouldn't want to show an error of nothing because it's not there. So therefore, we want it to be collapsed by default, and also that affects design time. So now, by default, since there is no property backing at design time, it falls back to the fallback value, which is collapsed. So now I have this message. It's working a little better, I think. Let's start it up and make sure that we have something, more useful, or at least more pretty. So let's start off with our test. Notice the extra space. We hit login. And it's taking a little bit to run. That's why it popped up again. And it's going away right away. That's not what we're looking for. So something is happening that we're not anticipating. So let's step through the code and find out why it's setting it from one value to the other. So let's start with our error message here. I have a feeling it might have something to do with the fact that this is asynchronous, and maybe we have an issue where it's hitting exception and doing this message and then coming back and saying this, which seems odd, but let's try and figure it out. Now, one thing to note, when you're doing asynchronous calls, you're stepping through, which you can do, it changes the timing. So the fact that I'm going to step through this may make it work. And that's okay. It's a little frustrating, but it's okay. Just know that probably the reason then is timing, because you change the timing when you run it yourself. I mean, this thing's been chugging along, and I've had it, open for a little bit. So if I pause it and talk to you, well, it's going to take a few seconds. In fact, this is where it's paused. It's taking a few seconds. It might be that I've fixed the timing issue already. We'll see. So we're going to go to step into, which is F11. I'm going to step into this one again. And it's going to go to the API helper. Let's actually step out of this one. I don't want that. The error message right now is empty string. It's already come to the exception, which the exception is not loaded yet. Let's load that. There you go. Now the exception is loaded. We have a bad request. There's our bad request right there. There's no inner exception. And now let's set the error message to ex.message. And we'll step into this call. And error message is still bad request. And it should be that it displays in the form, but it's not right now. So we're not quite sure why that currently isn't set. Let's hit pause right now. What we're going to do is look at, let's see if we can't find somewhere we can look at this property, which the problem with a view model is we're not actually paused on our view model, we're paused on our view. So we don't necessarily have access to our view model directly. But what we can do is we can take a look and debug a different way. So debugging, it's hard, and it leads to blind alleys and dead ends, and it can get frustrating at times. The thing is, just keep poking at it. That's my philosophy, at least. When I can't figure something out, I just keep coming at it from different angles. Now, the other thing is I haven't changed much, which means it's not hard for me to undo everything I just did and try it again, make sure it works. So right now, I did put this question mark in here. So maybe that's causing an issue. But I don't think so, because it worked before. Now that I think about it, it worked when it first started. I first tried this. That question mark was already in working. But down here, let's look at our login. I did change this. So let's comment that out. We haven't seen that work yet. Therefore, it's one of my changes. So let's just comment just that out and see if it solves our problem for us. So there's our API. It's running. Test, hit login. There we go. Now, it seemed like the first time I hit login, nothing happened. The second time, something happened. So I'm thinking it's not actually triggering the redisplay on this page. I think that's what's happening. So now I've got kind of a clue. So let's do this. Let's stop this. And we're going to start it again. And I'm going to put a breakpoint right, let's say line 94. Because it'll always come to line 94 when I hit login. So once this starts, I'm going to say test, and hit login. And so it went there. Now let's step over this. It goes right to the exception. Error message currently is null. And if I step over this, error message is now bad request, I hit continue, there's no message on the display. I can type other things in here, nothing. But if I hit login again, it goes back here again. Error message already has bad request in it. But if I hit that exception again and hit continue, now it says bad request. So what's the issue here? I think the issue is we're not capturing that, let's go look at it. We're not capturing the notify of property change for error message or is error visible. One of the two. Probably is error visible. Now I've got a theory here, and it's a wacky theory. It may be wrong, but is error visible only has a get. It's read only. What if the system doesn't like that? I'm going to put a set there just to see what happens. And then I've proven that this isn't really the issue. The error message equals empty string. Still, I keep it commented for now. But that shouldn't be the issue because that wasn't, we know that something else is causing the error. I'm not saying that didn't contribute. So test, hit login, nothing happened. So that wasn't it. It's always good to try this stuff though. Okay, so it wasn't the set that was the problem. I'll take that back out. I don't want to have too many changes floating around. And sometimes when you're looking at code, you stare at something, and maybe you've been staring at the screen and yelling at me the whole time. Good for you. You got it before I did. But sometimes you stare at your code and maybe walk away for a little bit. I didn't, but I did pause the video for a second and just kind of took a deep breath. And I figured you didn't need to hear that. But I found the problem. At least I'm pretty sure I found the problem. Error message. We have a get that returns the error message. We have a set that notifies a property change for is error visible and error message. And then it sets the error message. So what happens the first time we change our error message to have a full string, something other than empty string? Well, before we change the value away from null or empty string, we tell everybody it's been changed. And so if the timing is right, and it evidently is, we're going to have the page refresh that value on the form, and then it will show the error message or update the error message property. But it's too late because it's already updated and now it's waiting for the next update. So it's an ordering thing. Change the value first, then let people know. Don't let people know and then change the value. They're not waiting and watching now. This way, they are observing what has been done in the new state, not waiting for the change you're about to make. So that was my bad. Let's put this back in as well. Let's run this and see if it doesn't fix our problem. All right, so we have our login, test, login, bad request. Excellent. I'm timcorey.com, PWD 12345 period. Log in, that clears the screen. Now, if I were to add an extra M there, hit login, I get a bad request. I take it away. Actually, if I hit a K there, I hit login, it's going to go away for a second and come back. But now if I hit login, we're good to go. So it's working the way we expect it to. So now it's clearing the error message out when we no longer have an error, when we're trying over. And when we get an error, it puts that into the message box. Now at this point, we're going to stop because I think it's a good stopping point to be at. We've got the login form fully working so that if it authenticates, great, and it has the information back. If it doesn't authenticate for whatever reason, we get a message back saying, hey, it's been a bad request. We display that to the user. So we're all set now for the next step. The next step is kind of a cross-cutting step. What I mean by that is we're going to have to do a little bit of work in the, let's look at the Solution Explorer so it's a little more obvious. So we're going to have to do a little work in our API. We're going to grab this information. Let's pull it up. The user information. We're going to grab the first name, the last name, the email address, and we'll pull the date created. I'm not sure we're going to need it, but we'll pull it so we have it. So we're going to grab all that information from the database through the API and into our login page, where we're going to load it into a singleton object that'll store that for the lifespan of that logged in user. So as long as the user's logged in, we'll have what their first name and last name are, what their email address is. We'll have that ID of theirs, so we can use that for all future calls, and we'll know when the account was created for them. So I want to do this, hopefully an all-in-one video, because that way it gives you a full start to finish, going from the database, probably creating a store procedure for that, for the pull of the information, and then the API, creating the endpoint for getting that information based upon, again, who's logged in, and then just, pulling that through to the front end and putting it into a singleton we can then use for the rest of that user's lifespan. And we'll go ahead and destroy that or reset that singleton when they log out. So that's the next video. But for now, thanks for watching. And as always, I am Tim Corey.